Well, here's something you probably didn't expect. Desert tortoises have officially joined the wild ones today.
More than a dozen biologists and volunteers walked through the Mojave Desert, releasing these desert tortoises into the wild.
More than a dozen biologists and volunteers gathered to release them back into the wild. It turned out to be one of the most surprising experiments in conservation history. In a bold and unexpected move, hundreds of tortoises were set free into the vast, harsh stretches of the Sahara Desert. Their quiet mission? To succeed where the Great Green Wall Initiative had fallen short. Desert tortoises actually play a big role out there. They carry seeds in their travels, helping new plants take root. Still, many people were skeptical. Some even called the whole thing ridiculous. How could these slow, plodding creatures possibly survive, let alone make a difference, in one of the world's most unforgiving environments? But 2 years later, the results stunned everyone. This is the story of how one of nature's quietest animals unexpectedly solved a challenge that had stumped experts for years: a crumbling wall of trees. The Great Green Wall had once been one of Africa's boldest and most hopeful answers to the growing dangers of climate change. The idea was clear and ambitious: plant a wide band of trees across the continent, stretching from Senegal in the west to Djibouti in the east. The goal? Stop the Sahara from creeping further south. Launched in 2007 by the African Union, the project aimed to bring back 100 million hectares of damaged land by 2030. It had clear targets: to remove 250 million tons of carbon from the air and create 10 million green jobs for people across the Sahel region. With over $14 billion in international funding pledged, 22 countries came together to support it. For a while, it really seemed like Africa was making strong progress toward healing its land. But as time went on, problems started to appear. Even with all the funding and good intentions, progress on the ground was often slow and disappointing. Money was promised, but didn't always arrive, or wasn't used the right way. Some governments and groups were slow to act. Red tape made it hard for countries and local teams to work together. And without good long-term tracking, no one could say for sure what was working and what wasn't. One key place, the Ferlo Biosphere Reserve in northern Senegal, had been chosen early on as a major site for restoration. But it painted a worrying picture. Much of the land stayed dry and barren. Trenches had been dug to catch rain, but many of them dried up fast. Trees brought in from other places didn't survive the harsh Sahel climate and died soon after being planted. Security issues made things even harder. Armed groups like Boko Haram and Ansar Dine were active in some of the areas marked for restoration. Their presence made it unsafe for workers, scared off investment, and pushed already struggling communities into deeper crisis. As the desert kept spreading, daily life got tougher for people living nearby. Farmers couldn't count on their soil anymore. Herds of animals grew weak or died as grazing land disappeared. Families had no choice but to leave the places they'd lived for generations and look for better conditions elsewhere. The drop in biodiversity made the whole situation even more worrying. Key animals that once helped keep the ecosystem balanced were vanishing. One of the most troubling losses was the African spurred tortoise. These large tortoises used to be a major part of the Sahel's natural system, but as their habitats disappeared, their numbers crashed, especially in areas like Ferlo. With the original goals of the Great Green Wall slipping away and the desert still advancing, conservationists knew they had to think differently. They began asking a tough but creative question. If planting trees wasn't enough to hold back the desert, could another kind of life help? Could tortoises really do what trees couldn't? That unexpected question sparked the beginning of a new approach, one that no one saw coming. It meant shifting the focus away from planting trees and towards something more unexpected: rewilding. This new plan to bring life back to the desert was far from ordinary. SOPAM, a French nonprofit group, had already been working in Senegal for years. Since 2000, they had focused much of their work in the Furlough region. Their main mission there was to protect the African spurred tortoise. Known scientifically as Centrocheilus sulcata, this incredible reptile is native to the Sahel and Sahara regions of Africa. Today, it's considered endangered, but the African spurred tortoise is no ordinary creature. It's the largest tortoise on the African mainland and ranks among the biggest tortoises in the world. Some adults can weigh over 100 kilograms. But it's not just their size that sets them apart. These tortoises are expert diggers. They can dig huge underground burrows, with some going as deep as 15 meters and stretching up to 30 meters long. And those burrows do more than just give shelter. They help the environment in surprising ways, trapping moisture in the dry soil and improving its fertility. Over time, these cool, damp burrows have helped shape entire ecosystems. They provide shelter and create better growing conditions for other plants and animals trying to survive in the dry Sahel. SOPAM recognized this. To them, the tortoise wasn't just an endangered species, it was a natural builder, an engineer that could help bring the land back to life. With this insight, SOPAM teamed up with the Senegalese government to launch a bold new idea. Together, they planned to bring the tortoises back to areas where they had vanished. The goal wasn't just to protect the species, it was to use the tortoise as a tool to help restore broken landscapes. In 2011, a group called Foundation Ensemble joined the effort by offering financial support. They helped launch a pilot program that ran from June 2011 through December 2012. From the start, the project aimed to involve local people in every part of the process. Teachers were trained, awareness sessions were held in schools, and small community-led projects were created. Some of those local projects included simple garden plots that could produce food and even bring in a little income. And when people saw the tortoises up close, their view of nature started to shift. The tortoise was no longer just an animal, it became a symbol of a new kind of restoration, one led by nature and supported by those living closest to the land. SOPAM and its partners believed that real, lasting change could only happen if the people living in the region were part of the process from the start. By giving them meaningful roles, they hoped to build a stronger and more lasting path toward restoring the land. But it's one thing to draw up a plan. Putting it into action in one of the toughest environments on Earth was another story. Tortoises take the lead. Back in 2006, long before full funding had even come through, SOPAM took a chance and started testing tortoise reintroductions. They began with a small group of 36 tortoises raised in captivity. This wasn't a feel-good trial for the cameras. The team took it seriously. These tortoises weren't just released and left behind. From day one, their progress was carefully tracked. At first, researchers used radio tracking devices to follow each tortoise's movement. Later on, human trackers even followed them on foot, studying how they behaved, where they went, and how well they were adjusting to life in the wild again. The site chosen for reintroducing the tortoises wasn't picked at random. It was a carefully selected secure spot in Catanea, located within the Furlough Biosphere Reserve, an area considered vital for the environment on the southern edge of the Sahara Desert. This area was protected and managed with help from the National Parks Department of Senegal. Their support helped cut down on major risks to the tortoises, like overgrazing from livestock, seasonal bushfires, and illegal tree cutting. This site gave the tortoises a safe and controlled place to start adjusting to life back in the wild. The goal was to give the species a real shot at surviving long-term. But SOPAM knew that simply keeping the animals safe wasn't enough. Helping the tortoises meant involving the people who lived near the reserve too. That's why they launched a strong community awareness campaign, focusing especially on local families and schools. Children from nearby villages were invited to visit the tortoise site. During their visits, they got to meet the tortoises up close and learn about biodiversity in a fun, simple way. One of the teaching tools used was a game called Lieu d'Ortu, based on the popular French board game Dewa. It helped kids learn about the environment through play. But education didn't stop with just games. SOPM also put together a newsletter called Lettre d'Atoru, which was handed out around the community. The newsletter included updates on the tortoises, stories, and interesting facts. To make sure everyone could access it, even those who couldn't read, it was read aloud on local radio stations. That way, the message reached more people. Teachers from nearby schools were also brought into the effort. They received special training to help them include environmental topics in their daily lessons. That made sure the message of conservation made it not just into schools, but into homes as well. SOPM also understood that if people were going to support conservation, they needed ways to support themselves too. That's why they partnered with women's groups in the nearby town of Raneru. Two of the main groups involved were GPF Bombay and GIE Cowaral. These women's groups were given seeds, training, and support to start growing vegetables. These small market gardens didn't just provide fresh food, they also created income for families. It was a clear example of how protecting nature could go hand in hand with improving daily life. At first, everything seemed to be working. The tortoises were settling in. The community was getting involved. Conservation and development were happening side by side. There was a real feeling of hope and forward movement. But just as things were starting to gain momentum, old problems began to creep back in. And with them came new challenges no one had fully prepared for. When progress slowed, it sometimes felt like everything could fall apart. The already tough Sahel climate, hard to work with in the best of times, was becoming even more unpredictable because of climate change. Long, harsh droughts scorched the land. Crops and small garden plots that had once been steady sources of food and income shriveled under the constant burning sun. In villages like Lumbi and Lumbol, teams worked hard to install systems to collect and store rainwater. But things didn't go as planned. Delays kept piling up. Sometimes the right equipment didn't show up. Other times, the funding just ran out. In Ranu, the Bombay Women's Group had been working to make useful products from local plants and herbs. They tried to grow their efforts, but without a working water tank, they couldn't move forward. They needed water for everything, growing the plants, washing and processing their goods. Without it, they were stuck. And it wasn't just the weather causing problems. Security across the wider Sahel region was getting worse. Armed groups were active in several areas, making travel unsafe. Some zones had to be avoided entirely. Conservation teams often had to cancel or change plans at the last minute. Safety always came first, but every sudden change slowed the work. Check-ins were missed. Progress reports had to wait. There were other hurdles too. Tracking gear was hard to repair without the right parts. Roads were often in terrible shape, washed out or broken down completely. Internet and phone service was spotty or totally unavailable. Even simple tasks like collecting data on tortoise movements or rainfall became real challenges. For all these reasons, or maybe in spite of them, not every tortoise made it. Some died. Others disappeared completely. For the teams involved, each loss hit hard. They had poured their hearts into the project, and every tortoise mattered. At the same time, even with all the outreach and education, some local residents were still unsure. Their doubts came from real experience. Over the years, they had seen plenty of aid groups and NGOs come and go. These groups arrived with banners, catchy slogans, and high hopes, only to disappear when the money dried up or things got too hard. People remembered that. They'd seen it all before. They had also watched the Great Green Wall struggle. What once promised so much had delivered little in many places. The land still looked dry. Trees were scarce. The desert kept creeping forward. So it wasn't surprising that some started questioning the Tortoise Project too. Was this really working? Or was it just another nice-sounding plan that would fade away like the rest? But then something started to shift. It was slow and quiet at first, so small it was easy to miss. But over time it became harder not to notice. Burrows in the sand, little green shoots, a tiny hint of change. The turning point didn't come with headlines or big events. There were no loud announcements or grand openings. It just started happening. Months had passed since the tortoises were first reintroduced into the wild. Conservationists and local trackers had kept a close eye on the release sites. For a long time, it seemed like nothing much had changed. But then the trackers began to spot something different in the areas where the tortoises were settling in. Plants were starting to grow, but this wasn't from tree planting drives or seeds scattered by people. These were wild grasses, small succulents, and tough little shrubs, growing naturally with no help. And they were popping up around the areas where the tortoises had made their burrows. Over time, it became clear the tortoises were doing more than just surviving. They were directly helping the land recover. Their burrows held onto underground moisture. Their droppings added nutrients to the dry, sandy soil. Together, these things created tiny pockets of healthier ground, small microhabitats in an otherwise dry, tough landscape. These little green zones started to catch the attention of nearby wildlife. Birds, bugs, and small animals began returning, drawn by food, water, and shelter. In places that had once seemed empty, signs of life were quietly reappearing. What had started as a project to bring back tortoises was slowly turning into what looked like the early steps of real ecosystem recovery. People in nearby villages were noticing changes too. Some farmers saw their fields near tortoise areas staying green longer, even during dry spells. Their crops seemed a bit stronger. No one could say for sure if the tortoises were the reason, but the talk started to spread. In one village, Lamball, the community decided to try something. They started a school garden next to an area where tortoises often passed through. Using harvested rainwater, they kept the garden going, and early results were hopeful. In Lumbee, inspired by what was happening in Lamball, elders reached out to the same NGO that had supported the tortoise work. They wanted help starting their own version of the garden. Elsewhere in the region, a women's group that had once relied heavily on outside support was now finding its own way forward. The GIE Coral Group, which had started with help from the project, was now running its gardens independently. That kind of self-reliance was rare in this area, where many projects collapsed once the funding dried up. Their success stood out, not just as a win for one group, but as a model for what real lasting progress could look like. At first, it had seemed like just a conservation project to save tortoises. But little by little, it became clear that something much bigger was happening. The tortoises weren't just coming back, they were changing the future of the land itself. All around the region, things were shifting. Greener fields, stronger gardens, animals returning, and more people feeling capable of doing the work themselves. It started changing how people viewed the Tortoise Project. What once looked like an effort to save one species was becoming something much more meaningful. The connections were getting harder to ignore. These animals weren't just making a comeback, they were shaping the land. They were rebuilding the soil, bringing back plants, and creating small webs of life that were now spreading beyond just the areas around their burrows. And then, all that quiet progress led to something no one had quite expected. A surprising result: a living green mosaic. 2 years after the large-scale tortoise release, both satellite images and ground surveys confirmed what local trackers had already been seeing. The tortoise zones looked different. While the surrounding land remained dry and worn out, these areas had healthier soil, and life was returning. The change was clear. The areas where tortoises had been reintroduced had noticeably more vegetation. It wasn't a small difference either. Even though the entire region had suffered through the same punishing drought, the tortoise zones were visibly greener and in better shape than everything around them. The difference was so striking that it caught the attention of researchers, conservationists, and even government officials. In the zones where tortoises had been reintroduced, the soil had noticeably improved. It had better structure, held onto moisture, and was far less likely to be blown away by wind. Biodiversity had also increased. More plants were growing, insects returned. Small mammals, birds, and even a few reptiles that hadn't been seen in years began to come back. Trees that had once been cut down or dried out during drought were showing signs of recovery. Tiny seedlings were popping up naturally. Young saplings were taking root without irrigation, without fertilizer, and without fencing. Something real and unexpected was happening. This stood in stark contrast to parts of the Green Wall Project. In many of those planting areas, trees had died off due to lack of water or care. But in the places where tortoises had returned, nature seemed to be healing itself. The tortoises weren't just surviving, they were changing the land. As they moved through their environment, they dug into the earth, spread seeds, and left behind natural fertilizer. Their daily routines helped manage both moisture and temperature in their surroundings. Some scientists began calling them natural land engineers. They were doing work that no human team could do across such a wide area, at least not without huge costs and resources. Because of this unexpected success, interest grew quickly. Conservationists and policymakers began to take notice. And then came a bold idea. What if a path for tortoises could be the path forward for both people and nature? Some researchers suggested a new strategy. Build tortoise corridors across the region and weave them into future stages of the Green Wall. These routes would allow the tortoises to spread further, carrying their environmental benefits with them. It would be a way to combine rewilding with reforestation, blending two strategies into one that could support communities and ecosystems alike. But the impact wasn't just about the environment, it was social too. The tortoises started to shift how people saw the land and themselves. In the past, most children had never even seen a tortoise in real life. Now they were spotting them regularly. What used to be seen as just a strange desert animal was becoming a symbol of local pride. Stories were shared. Families talked about how their land was changing. Women's gardening groups began connecting their food work to conservation. They adjusted their planting styles to help the soil and support wildlife. For them, the tortoises' return became proof that people and nature really could work together. A species once nearly gone from the region had not only come back, it had reclaimed its place in the ecosystem. And the project's success raised a deeper question. Was this a one-time breakthrough or the beginning of a larger shift? Legacy of the Tortoise Wall. Today, the Furlough Tortoise Project has become known across Africa. What started as a small conservation effort in Senegal has grown into a widely respected success story. It's not just seen as a win for protecting one species, it's also now a leading example of low-cost, community-led restoration. In areas where expensive, high-tech solutions have failed to deliver lasting results, the furlough model has quietly thrived. And that's given people new hope. It's shown that local communities can take the lead in saving biodiversity. Senegal's National Parks Department has been closely tracking the project. While there's no official nationwide rollout yet, leaders are considering whether to start similar programs in other protected areas. The idea would be to stick with what worked: local partnerships, manageable cost, and long-term thinking. At the same time, other conservation groups are exploring something that once seemed unlikely: getting private tortoise owners involved in the rewilding effort. Though still in early planning, the idea would allow people who raise tortoises in captivity to donate hatchlings. These young tortoises could then be released into protected areas where they'd be watched and cared for. If this model moves forward, everyday people could directly support the recovery of damaged landscapes. It could also boost tortoise numbers faster and improve genetic diversity, something traditional breeding programs struggle to do on their own. With climate change intensifying and natural habitats under growing pressure, the story of the Furlough Tortoise Project stands out. It's a reminder that even the smallest, most overlooked animals can make a big difference. In a world where many large-scale environmental projects fall short, this quiet grassroots effort has become a powerful symbol of what's possible when nature and communities work hand in hand. And maybe the most important lesson of all, real change doesn't always come from billion-dollar budgets or cutting-edge technology. Sometimes it starts with something as small and as steady as a tortoise. What do you think about this approach? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this story inspiring, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.